Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. This is the nature of life. You have your ups and your downs. In our homes, perhaps there's a difference of opinion that can raise to a higher level into a conflict between husband and wife, parents and children. In the workplace, it could happen amongst peers, between colleagues, subordinates, and superordinates. It's all part of life. But happy is that individual who is able to deal with these different kinds of scenarios, maintaining his dignity without saying hurtful things. But the critical thing in all of this, there are some steps that need to be taken. I have no doubt through the discussions we're going to have today, we'll be reminded of what we can do to improve our relationships. Fatima, I know that you are involved with the marital issues and stuff like that. What do you understand by conflict? What does that word mean to you?
For me, having a conflict in a marriage, you need to understand, is it your problem or does the problem belong to somebody else? If it belongs to your partner, then you would be able to assess the situation more assertively from the outside and be able to resolve that problem without causing more hurt or pain or anger.
Sam?
In my opinion, it's a bit of a disagreement between two parties. And I think the importance is how you actually resolve the conflict. I think conflict is important because it basically will take you to a next level. And if you have conflict, it becomes very innovative, in my opinion.
You know, Sam, what you're saying is interesting. It's almost like a unique perspective. You know, Yusuf, you find today, I've seen this happen. I've seen it happen that I was, for example, part of a committee. And I've seen some of the members of the committee will travel together, yet at the meeting, they'll have robust discussions. They would disagree, right? And the meeting is over, they are laughing, they're happy, and you know, right? So there isn't any kind of issue, as it were. But why is it today that lots of people, whether it's a lack of immaturity, they want only people that are like-minded, and if I say something, you must agree with me. If you do not agree with me, then you and I are not going to be friends, and it leads to a conflict.
Look, that's a very good point, because I think this issue of diversity is the crux of it, right? In a marriage, there's two people that get together that come from different backgrounds. There's different values. There's different rearing. So the way I see the world is very different to the way you see the world. We all have a blinker, a perception of how we see something. Right now, if we see this book, the Holy Quran, here in front of us, you'll see it in a different way. The colors, everything, the way you perceiving it is through your background, through your DNA imprint as well. And so each one of us will see it differently. So by its very nature, there are differences in the world. The question then is, why is it that some people, some groups are able to, as you said, can see through those differences, respect those differences, and yet still find commonality? And why are others not able to do it? Now, there's very many reasons for that, and I guess that's the objective of this, is to get to why do we see things differently. But the one thing I would say, and this is a strategic issue, if you look at the world today, you are seeing more angst, you are seeing more conflict in the main, you are seeing more of a disparity between people, even in our country, right? And why is that? And I think one of the main reasons is that there is this fear that is being perpetuated. So when people operate with fear that you are different from me and you may unshackle my domain, even in a home, then what happens is people put up blinkers, put up barriers, put up the shield, and through that there is no communication, there is no meeting of the minds, and there is not what you say, that joy that happens, even after respecting the differences.
Okay, I mean, the point that you're making is it's often as a result of your own insecurities, as it were, and then you find difficult to deal with situations. But, Karen?
If I may comment, I mean, I just want to give you an example of a conflict. I actually was a young boy, basically went into the apprenticeship program. And as a Muslim, basically, it was a very, very difficult situation that I was in. And at the time when I went for the interview, I had only one criteria where I need to go for Jummah Salah on a Friday. And guess what? As I went in, when I went to the training center, it was a no-go. I wasn't allowed to go for Jummah. And then ending up, we know 3 Jummahs you missed, and we got a problem. So that's where I started, that whole conflict started. And as a young boy, and then I spoke to my dad, and my dad said, have sabr, have sabr. So, I had sabr, then after a while, I actually then needed to deal with that conflict. So much so now, alhamdulillah, everyone's allowed to go for Jummah Salah. So I think it's important that you understand how to deal with that conflict as well. So it basically opens a lot of avenues.
Okay, the question I want to ask, and we'll look at the different stages, the different ways of handling conflict, right? There are different models around, but we're not yet pedantic, but we'll share some things that can help people. Now, a simple example, Fatima, my wife and I love her. I call her my Shusha Babulina, my doll, Hansi doll. I love you, darling. Right? Now, so she and I say we disagree. When would our disagreement, because I do not say disagreement and conflict the same thing, right? My own feeling, and you could correct me, a conflict is when a disagreement is ignored repeatedly, it culminates into a conflict.
When the volcano overflows.
Right. Now, in terms of the marital situation, is conflict unavoidable?
In marriage, conflict is not unavoidable. So there will always be a conflict. Remember, like Yusuf says, that you're coming from 2 different backgrounds. You're coming with different values. And if you look at a marriage...
I tell you, I want to stop you there, Fatih. I want to interrogate this a bit. I tell you why. My take, this is a personal, it's not from textbook or whatever. My take is this, that disagreement is unavoidable, but conflict is avoidable.
Correct.
This is my take. And what I'm saying essentially, that if my wife and I disagree, right, and if the disagreement is dealt with, it will not culminate into a conflict.
If both parties, like husband and wife, you and your wife, are emotionally intelligent, then yes, conflict is avoidable. But if you look at today's time, conflict is not avoidable. Because what happens is within the marriage, when the couple get married, they're bringing in their own childhood wounds as well, right? And based on their experiences in life, they're going to come in, and let's just say they both disagree that shopping at Pick and Pay is far more better than shopping at ShopRite Checkers, right? And they have this disagreement, but if they're not going to be able to communicate with each other, they're not going to be able to resolve that. And in today's time, that small little thing can then become a huge problem and become a conflict, and it could also result in divorce.
Okay, I agree with you. 1 second. I agree with you that when couples are emotionally intelligent, that's the most effective antidote in terms of that. And what you are saying from your own experience, it's anecdotal, not based on empirical research.
Yes.
Anecdotal, from your experience, you find that couples suffer from post-traumatic stress. And so as a result, because of the diverse backgrounds, they do not know how to gel. That's what you are saying.
And the most important thing is with conflict resolution within a marriage, or to avoid having that conflict, is well, you need to be able to detach. When you detach and you don't have an expectation of what you want, then you're able to actually think more clearly and go into it and deal with it, because then you're able to communicate effectively and assertively as well.
Yusuf, you're going to...
What I wanted to say is that it's entirely true that based on the circumstances today, and because of the lack of emotional intelligence, etc. But the truth is, and I don't want to give everybody who's in a conflict this get out of jail clause, because we may be sending the wrong message, and this is very important. If you're not emotionally intelligent, that's something that you need to work on.
Correct.
Right. So it still comes back to Idris's point, which is, yes, differences is unavoidable. They will always, that is the dynamics of the world we live in. There is not a homogeneous society. We are all made uniquely different. That is how Allah wanted us to be put on this earth. It is even verses in the Quran that states why we're different from a race and creed perspective, because to understand each other. But when it comes to conflict, we have the choice, and the choice lies with us to be able to turn that difference into good, or to turn it into conflict, which is negative.
I think it's a nice way of ending this, to turn it into something positive. We'll be back immediately after this break. Do not forget, reflect, change, inspire. And I hope you and your wife, you're holding her hands and telling her, my darling, my baby, I love you.
Time is now. Time is now.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You see, alhamdulillah, I think there is something instructive and didactic about our first segment, that Fatima and I had a difference of opinion. I did not get agitated or upset. Fatima did not say, I don't know why I came to this program. And that's a beautiful part of this issue, that as Yusuf was saying also, that, you know, when there's a disagreement, it's healthy, you know, we need that. The worst thing ever is to be in a marriage where your wife or husband agrees with everything you are going to say. Then you become so predictable, right? So anyway, I love you, my darling. Right? So anyway, now this segment we want to speak about, why is it important to understand the psychology of conflict? Why is it important for us to understand you know, how and why we, you know, when you are in the situation, to understand what is going on, you know. Because there is a tendency, Sam, and perhaps because of your experience in that field, right? There's a tendency for us to be so subjective that we find difficult to detach ourselves and see it from the perspective of the other.
I think it's important not to attach emotion to a conflict, because once you attach emotion to that conflict, then you lose the ability to resolve that conflict. In my opinion, there's different, I mean, you get different types of conflict in the workplace, conflicts at home, but conflict at the workplace, in my opinion, it's a little bit difficult to handle, because you need to be a little bit calmer about the whole thing. And at home, I'm not an expert, but the thing is, you know, usually when my wife says something, I drink a sip of water, and then it forces me not to say anything. So I keep quiet, and then we've got no conflict, I must say. But in the workplace, I think sometimes, you know, you're very forthright, and you really want certain things to happen, and it needs to happen the way you want it to. So it's a bit difficult, because I've worked in the corporate for a long time, and now I'm actually started up my own business as well. being the CEO of Barak Mining, it's not easy because you've got a lot of the multinationals that are actually bullying you in a certain fashion. Making certain that the smaller guys actually don't deal with you. So you got different types of conflict all the time, and you need to understand how to rectify the situation. There's different ways of handling that. But I think it's important that you know how you need to steer so that you create your own identity as well.
You see, but the point, when you were chatting, this is a point. You may have a particular model, right? And I really believe one should have an eclectic approach. You don't use the same model in each situation because the personalities are different. Yusuf, how important is it to understand the personality that you are dealing with in preparing, where, for example, person X and person Y, and say you're person X, the other person Y, and you are in authority, and there is a conflict situation there. Perhaps the person working under you is not fulfilling whatever, and you indicate to him that tomorrow, we need to discuss this. I want you to think about it. So you are preparing it. How important it is to understand that personality, and what steps should be taken, because in terms of the different models, you have different kinds of models, which I don't want to preempt now, but we'll talk about it.
Look, I think the greatest example of a conflict that was resolved and managed, some may see it as the biggest nightmare today, but if we really look at it, the wisdom behind why we sit in here today and we have a relatively peaceful country compared to many other countries is an example that was shown in South Africa in 1994 and just prior to that. I mean, here was two warring factions that fought for many years with totally different ideologies, yet were able to come together with, like I said, different thinking, a lot of hurt, a lot of pain, a lot of fear on the other side as to what will happen when a majority takes over. I am a minority. Yet, when you look at it, today they've become some of the best friends, right? Now, and a solution that is being now shared to many other parts of the world. Now, how did that happen? That happens when there has to be a give and take. You cannot look at it from your perspective only, no matter how you've been hurt. In actual fact, that is the way that the Prophet, peace be upon him, has shown us. How better a conflict 1400 years ago, when the Prophet and his people were banished out of Makkah from their homeland, where they were born, to a very, very foreign land, with all the treacherous conditions that they went to. 14 years later, or 13 years later, came back. There was this treaty that was set up also, where they had to compromise against the better judgment of his counterparts. The Prophet said, I created the peaceful treaty to allow us to go back and to and fro where there will be no wars. It was broken also. But the point of the matter is, you have to give. If you're going to only look at it, and I think that's the point, if whichever party, if the ANC at the time or the oppressed had to look at it only from their perspective, if the Prophet, peace be upon him, had to only look at it from his perspective, then nothing would have been achieved. So sometimes what happens is for the broader good, and we need to look at what is you ultimately wanting to achieve. Do you want to achieve a better marriage? Do you want to achieve a better organization? Do you want to achieve a better country? You have to give.
Yeah. You see, Yusuf, you're speaking about compromise, right? Our Nabi sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said words to this effect: forgive those who hurt you, do good to those who harm you. So you speak of compromise. That's one model. That's an important model. What about you have the situation of avoidance? There are some people would not want to get into discussing any conflict because they can't handle it. They ignore it. Is ignoring something important? For example, in a marital situation where the husband this is one of the recurring themes, and I'm sure, Fatima, you also come across this. The wife is prepared to come for counseling. She says, my husband doesn't want to come. And he often says, nothing is wrong with me. But he forgets he's in the institution of marriage. And what about that individual? You find a lot of sisters say, you know what, whenever I want to discuss an issue with my husband, he wants to avoid, he doesn't want to talk about it. How critical is it to talk about it as a starting point, to share the feelings about a situation?
In a marriage, if you don't discuss your feelings with your partner and what is irritating you, it only builds up. So what I do is I normally say to my clients that there's a way in which you can communicate, which is effective communication. And by effectively communicating, your husband or your wife would be able to then listen, not with listening with you know, oh, she's trying to say something to me, or blame, or whatever the case might be. But effective listening to what your partner is actually trying to say, the message behind that. And if you're, well, men usually do close up and they don't want to deal with the conflict, or they, you know, they put up these barriers in front of them because they don't know how to deal with conflict. So it's important to allow him that space, allow him to cool himself down, or for him to actually come back and reflect and say, okay, you know what, there might be some validity to what's being said, and then take it from there. If a wife is able to communicate effectively, then the husband is going to be able to come forward and say, okay, I'm ready to resolve this matter.
In fact, you know, when I do premarital counseling, I ask them 100 questions before they marry. You know, it puts the marriage off completely. No, joke. Right, so, but one of the things I ask them is this: if you and your wife-to-be, she's sitting there, get into a situation of disagreement, conflict, how would you like to handle it? And that's an important question, because the reality is, and I know it, you know, whilst you're saying it's true about men, you know, men, we also have wisdom. Sometimes we say, no, we'll discuss it tomorrow, not to exacerbate it, and hopefully the wife has a bout of amnesia, you know.
Which never happens.
Never, I'm just teasing, right? Anyway, brothers and sisters, you see, inevitably there are going to be disagreements, but the important thing is, nothing is more beautiful than to come home and say, this is my home, this is my sanctuary. Or go to the workplace where people are happy to see you, they interact with you. That's the nature of life. Not everyone is going to agree with you. You do not have the monopoly of knowledge. I think what is critical is to sit back, do not have a knee-jerk reaction, and hopefully you'll be able to resolve situations that can be conflictual or have the potential to become exacerbated. We'll be back immediately after this.
Time is now. Time is now.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. You know, one of the things that I've learned is that when people have low self-esteem, right, and when they want to share a situation with the partner, they begin to have a victim mentality, and that can be problematic. And I think it's very, very important that to be creative when you're dealing with people, and to looking at solutions, right? Now, Sam, you know, being involved, you know, in the work that you are doing, this question is perhaps going to be subjective. How many people work for you, Sam?
At the moment, about 40.
40 people.
Yes.
How do they perceive you? Why I'm asking the question is, do they say to themselves that we'll go to Sam because he's going to solve the problem? We'll go to Sam, he would defer the problem. When we go to Sam, he's a person of justice, he'll tell us exactly who's right and wrong in the situation. But I think it's also important how you are perceived by people.
For sure. I think that's very important, because I tend to do a 360 on myself now and then, so that at least I have a good feeling of what people think of me. I think the ability to listen is important, more than just blurting out what you want to say all the time. And listen with, not listening with saying something in return, but listening to understand, and communicate all the time. I think the key element to resolve conflict is to keep that communication barriers open.
No, I think it's a fundamental point that you make, because psychologists also say revealing is healing. When people have an opportunity, like even the marital situation, to speak what's in their heart is cathartic, they feel much better about it. But if they are not allowed to express it, then they implode. It has other consequences. So Yusuf, in terms of this, I know that in terms of the work that you do, you meet people different. Sometimes it could be a conflict of ideas. There may be a conflict of ideas, yet you see potential in doing business with this person. That you understand, how do you deal with it? There's sometimes what happens, we tend not to express that you have a different perspective for fear you might lose the potential customer.
Look, from a business perspective, and I'm doing a few big sort of transactions, right? And that's one of the big issues, is to find that the parties there's a meeting of the minds. Now, it stems from also this sort of scarcity mindset, which I think we've been sold. It's one of the biggest ills, I believe, of the Industrial Revolution. As much as it was great in the last 100 years to create vibrant economies, it has boxed people right from the time that you're in school. You've been told, actually a lie, that you're not good enough, you're limited. There's even economics. You go to your first economic lesson and they teach you the scarcity of resources. The point of the matter is, and this is a new wave that's coming up, is that we actually live in an abundant world, right? Islamically, that's the principle, is that you can achieve whatever that is ordained for you. And we limit ourselves from that ordainment. So if you are comfortable, whether you're a husband, whether you're a wife, whether it is a child, whether you're in a business deal, whether you're a politician, whoever you are, if you know and you are comfortable with who you are, you know that's the value that you're going to be putting in to that relationship, to that organization, and that is going to be that return. Why do we create the scarcity mindset? Is when people are greedy, when I want it all, when I'm a taker. Then what do is I create this fear, and I actually am being, I think we spoke about bullying, you're actually being a dictator, a bully, because you're trying to play on the other's weakness. Right? Trying to control. And so what happens is you have destruction. You have destruction of the family, you have destruction of an organization that could have been such a contributor to jobs, to goodness. You're talking about that where you're talking big business. If big business can speak to small business and say, look at how can I add value. Big business says I can get this innovation from small business. Small business, I can get this clientele and we can work together. So there's so much we can do. Even conflicts in regions, in countries. We can all work together for the betterment. It comes down to the fundamental, I've learned. So one of the clerics I was reading or listening to a YouTube is, one of the fundamentals of Islam is that, and this is what I believe we can be offering to the world, is that it's a giving. It's about giving. If we think less of ourselves and give more, then there'll be betterment.
You know what?
Yeah.
You know what? It's a point. It's about attitude and the values we have. You will not believe it. I studied History 3 at UNISA, and I was a student of history at school. And at school, I didn't realize that we should focus so much on events that we forgot about the personality of the individuals. And then we learned, for example, there is a book, I remember, a beautiful book by Ergang, history book, thick book, right? And his first few pages was about the character and personality of these individuals. And he said there that Napoleon Bonaparte was a megalomaniac. You know? You know what I mean? So he said, essentially, the fall of France was a fall of this particular individual, because everything was about him, his particular ego. And that's very, very important. I mean, the question to be made, we talk about conflict resolution. Are we saying there is a solution to every conflict? Is there a time? Is there a time when you got to say, we got to part ways? I remember reading this book, Moving from Good to Great, by Collins, right?
Yeah,
and Jim Collins says something beautiful. He says many things that are beautiful. He says that, you know, a company is like a bus, right? Because sometimes in the bus you change the seating. Right. Sometimes you stop the bus, you ask some people, get off. You know what I'm saying to you? So the idea about, you know, finding a resolution, right? Because we can also, and we need to speak about this over here, and when we do part, how should we part? That's a fundamental thing. Do we part with dignity? Do you rob a person of the dignity, right? So we need to talk about these things. So there we have it. Time is going so quickly, unbelievable. We're still warming up here, right? You know, I know Fatih wants to deliver a maiden speech and all that. We are holding her back here, you know, and Sam wants to deal with something else. We're curbing them, you know, we're curbing them here. Alhamdulillah, you know, this is only Allah's barakah, really, you know. It's not about me, you, it's about, let's say, and we say this, it's Allah's mercy, man. It's really Allah's mercy. And the thing about abundance, you know, when people know, you know, when you feel good for other people, it'll be great. So my beloved brothers and sisters, the next time, you know, people ask me, he said, how come you and your wife are so happy? I said, she goes away and I follow her.
Time is now. Time is now.
You know, sometimes people, Yusuf, feel very diminished when someone gives some kind of feedback in the workplace, or the wife says something, the husband feels very, very diminished, you know, and very hurt. It affects them for a long time. What qualities should people possess? And it's also an advice for schools and for parents to develop in the children, so sometimes they can have a thick skin, not allow people to crawl underneath the skin. At the same token, that when a feedback which is honest and helps them to grow, they need to embrace it, knowing what to embrace, knowing what to reject, and not being affected.
You know, that question went straight to my heart. It actually went to my deepest part of my body, because it's something that I grappled with for many years. The issue, and I think it stems from self-esteem, to be honest. That's the crux of it, is the self-esteem. And you'll never understand how your ego plays a game with you. Sometimes a lack of self-esteem is not necessarily somebody that's shy, that doesn't speak. Sometimes somebody that's too bravado actually
Has low
has low self-esteem. And I suffered a lot from that. I would come across as the leader of the pack, right? I would, if we went out amongst friends, I'd be the loud mouth, right? I'd be the controlling one, the narcissistic one that I've come to understand, right? Which is the biggest problem, and I know you can relate to that from a relationship perspective. And I came to the realization, and there was very many reasons for it, which I've had to go, and this is something that I encouraged those that are watching to do practically, is get to understand who you are. Take off this bull crap that we carry, this unnecessary veneers that we carry, because it's heavy, it brings you down. Take it off and get to who you are. There's good that you have and there's bad that you have. There's nothing wrong with that. The fact that I was like that, there's no guilt for it, just the awareness of it. I know now what not to do. And when you do that, it becomes liberating. So then now, when somebody is critical because of a lack, what you do is, somebody will say, hey, Uncle Idris, you're looking a bit fat right now. And what would happen is it would affect you, right?
It's already affecting.
Exactly. So you go into this mode of, exactly, right?
Yeah.
So you go into this mode of like feeling negative, so you get into a negative state. But when you get to the point where you know who you are, comfortable with who you are, you know what you're doing, then things like that don't affect you. Now that's when you are successful in business, as a partner, because you become immune to it. You learn the tools and techniques of saying, I'm comfortable with who I am. Yes, no, we're human. There will always be a sensitive part in us, let's be honest. But you don't let it affect you and let it get you into that negative energy where then you attract more negativity.
So it's what the point that you're making, you've got to be authentic, right? And the idea is that no external stimuli can make you happy except your inner self.
Yes.
So that's important, to be comfortable with who you are. And that's a very critical point.
Activities, can I just say something?
Please.
That it's also important to understand from a relationship point of view, and maybe even in business, that when people come with their issues and their problems and they project it onto you, and if you are able to understand that and notice that also, then you know when to step back and not take things personally. In business, I guess it's the same as well, because a leader doesn't actually allow his employees to actually, it doesn't allow the conflict within a company also to, you know, get to him, because he knows that it's not about him only.
You see, that's a point. I think when you're talking about leaders, you got to take the rough with the smooth.
Yes.
I mean, there are times people are going to massage your ego, others are going to be harshly critical, and you got to take it on your chin. And that's a beautiful part of it. That's a beautiful part of life. And you are going to be tested. Allah will test you in different ways. The world is not meant to be a Jannah. You know, you can have your moments, right, Sam? And this is the whole aspect. And I think the one is, we speak about a conflict with others. What about your own internal conflict, your own mind, where you got conflicting ideas and so on and so forth? You know, how do you deal with that, Sam?
So, in my opinion, conflict is, you need to embrace conflict, because once you embrace conflict, it gives you the ability to portray yourself better. That's, in my opinion, that's how.
Because what it does, it makes you more resilient, isn't it?
Definitely.
Yeah.
Definitely.
Okay. And the other aspect I want to ask you whilst you're there, right? Do you think when there is a conflict and when you try to resolve it, does it have a long-term positive impact, or there are some scars there? The reason I'm saying this to you, I've got a book that I bought, you know, some years ago. It was called Abolish Appraisals in Your Company. Abolish Appraisals. And it's a very interesting book, because he argues that people can be the closest of buddies. If I'm the appraiser, right, and you know, if I have to do the appraisal of my colleague, no matter how I sugarcoat it, it's going to have an impact on my relationship. So he argues that to avoid appraisals, you make sure you get the right people for the right job at the very beginning. 100%. They are self-motivated, right? So in this situation, I mean, if you, in your experience, either as a CEO of the company or working on the level fields with other people, either through your own experience or the experience of other people, do you think when there is a conflict situation and there has been effort to resolve it, where one person handles it far better, is happy, is able to speak to the other guy is not responding or receptive to it?
I think having the right, you made a mention before, having the right people on the bus, and if you've got the wrong people on the bus, then you need to get out of the bus, you know. So I think having the right people, you know, for the job is important.
So in other words, you are saying again about, you know, from the very beginning, making the right kind of choices, knowing exactly what you're looking for. That's
Correct.
Fundamental, right? Yusuf, your parting message?
Yeah, my parting message is, I think we're speaking a lot about differences. I think the bottom line is we need to see through those differences. At the same time, we cannot be romantic. The truth of the matter is, and when Fatima was speaking, we talked on a marital side. I just thought of something so powerful. I said that if there in the Quran, there is a surah dedicated to the divorce. Because as much as we know there's a hadith that says that Allah shudders when there's a divorce, so He doesn't want, or the arsh, not that Allah, the arsh shudders, then of course there's an opportunity that is opened also for a parting of the ways, for getting off the bus, if it doesn't work. But it's about every avenue, and that's the hadith also, on every avenue. If you just look at the way you divorce, there's beauty in it. The 3 month cycle, because they're giving you every opportunity to
But the point, see, the point is this, that, you know, in a divorce, if a couple can say, my husband and I tried everything humanly possible, right? And we realize that we have to separate. You separate not when you're angry, but when you are calm. So my beloved brothers and sisters, there it is, that the issue of conflict is problematic, but if you want to be enriched, sometimes it's important to be honest. Do not suffer in silence. When you keep on agreeing, yet you want to disagree. But when you do disagree, disagree agreeably. You don't have to rant and rave. I can say to someone, Yusuf, I'm upset. It doesn't make me less upset. So inshallah, my brothers and sisters, look at your wife with the eye of love and look at him with the eye of love. Hold each other and hug each other. Tell your children we care for you. I might disagree with you, but I do not despise you. This is Idris Kamisa saying, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.